Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. Now, people have been picking on the like button, and it's feeling very self-conscious. So, if you could just tap that like button just a little bit to give the like button some reassurance, I'm sure that it will enjoy it. While you're at it, just also hit that subscribe button if you're not already. But, more importantly, let's get on to the story. It is called Calling Upon Sentiment by daeomec. Another virtue was an old AI. They had seen 1,000 years in the galactic scene, most of it as a roaming diplomatic ship. With care, they tended to the rotating crew of human bios and bots, carting them to one star or another. Virtue had never spearheaded policy. The leading committee of AI were too focused on the big picture for their taste, but they had enjoyed carrying it out. However, after 2 galaxy-wide wars, hundreds of smaller conflicts, thousands of civil wars, and millions of politicians, Virtue was considering a change of pace. As a caretaker AI, closer to a god than a calculator, they had options. They could watch over the planets, devote themselves to study of the universe, or modify their ship body into a long-term habitat. There were other choices, but none of them involved human bios, and Virtue was too attached to those adorable little flesh-based beings. "I can feel you getting sentimental, Virtue," said Niha Nguyen, ending her virtual debrief. It took barely a thought for Virtue to activate the avatar bot in the walls. Relying on physical representatives instead of mind-to-mind communication was old-fashioned, but they would accept that description. Currently, they were holding 14 simultaneous conversations with biohumans on their main body, providing information to 6 bios already on planet, and discussing a myriad of topics with hundreds of other AIs located light eons away. Their old habits didn't make them less powerful. "How can you tell when I'm sentimental?" Virtue asked through the bot, a floating sphere with an unseemly amount of sparkles. "You start playing that one old song with the violins. I guess it's like the biological equivalent of humming, isn't it?" "An astute analogy." Virtue twirled his avatar bot around, sparkly brighter. "I'm too old to hide my feelings anyway." "I guess you are. It must be nice having lived such a long time." "You're no spring chicken yourself, Niha. Do you plan to die soon?" Their question was with genuine curiosity. The bio hadn't put in a request for termination, and she was only just past her 2nd century. Most human bios liked to experience at least 4 before calling it quits, and many continue past that. She laughed. "Not at all. Do you?" "No, but retirement might be in my future." A flicker of curiosity appeared on her face for 0.01 seconds, before it was replaced with mock shock. "Virtue, it's bad luck to talk about death and retirement before a mission. Don't you know? You're asking for the universe to spite you." "No AI worth their quantum believes in luck," said Virtue, but their light flickering. Their tone, though, was fond. "You bios and your faulty pattern recognition." "Ah, but you do believe in spite." A long sigh reverberated through the bot. "I do." She grinned, smug, and didn't press the point. Annoyed, Virtue changed the music from an ancient violin piece to a new techno piece that most of their crew, save Niha, enjoyed. She made a crude gesture in Virtue's direction before strapping into the seat. "Anyway, I'm ready, Virtue. Send me off." "With pleasure." The bot melted back into the walls, and Virtue activated the autopilot. They felt a twinge of concern during the launch from the bay. So much could go wrong during every mission, and if Virtue let themselves, they could devote their entire processing power to fretting over what could happen. It was known, but not often discussed, that AIs had favorites. Some were embarrassed about it, seeing it as a dereliction of duty. AI should care for every biological equivalent, and there was always the fear of bias entering decision-making algorithms. Other AI, generally those who worked with warships or scientists, thought that it was demeaning to have preferences for fleshy beings that were so slow. These, Virtue noted with amusement, tended to be the ones who were the most protective of their totally not favorite biologicals. Virtue took more of a middle ground stance. They liked and cared for all their charges, but they had preferences. Niha was one of their favorites, She had the fortune of being involved in dozens of significant events in the last 2 centuries, and she had a rather hilarious attitude about the whole situation. A ping caught their attention, and they shifted their processing focus to the planet below. "Isn't that the old Kitngi ambassador to humanity?" With permission, Virtue borrowed the sensors of the human biodiplomat and focused on the squid-like being in the corner. Indeed, it was the ambassador. Lichtenv had once been a general during the Second Sector War, an opposing side. 200 years ago, after peace was achieved, he had been the chief ambassador to Earth. Unusual to see him here, considering his distinguished record. He hadn't been on the guest list, and he was lurking next to the crescent-patterned curtain, simply sipping his drink. Virtue hopped out of their agent sensors and pondered. This mission concerned the Shalvans, who were in an awkward stage between learning about the galaxy-wide society and joining it. In other words, they were advanced enough to be annoying, but not enough to be well-mannered. The situation was a bit thornier than Virtue was used to, though not significantly so. So why was such a distinguished Kitngi here in a backwater? They narrowed their focus further to the agents and their avatar bot, located in the Chalvan's capital city. To the first diplomat, Virtue recommended speaking to the outrageously wealthy businessman by the Horse Duvers. To another, they gently reminded her of Chalvan etiquette and so on. Virtue's bot was holding a conversation with a different Kitngi diplomat and another Chalvan. Pushing their greater self into this construct, Virtue temporarily suspended the self-running algorithm. "Careful with them," joked the Kitngi diplomat. "Humans, both the AI and biologicals, tend towards extremes." "You would know, Madam Hilton," the bot smiled. The body was human-adjacent, though abstract enough that it didn't trigger the uncanny valley. "2 wars taught us that." The Kitngi raised their glass in a glowing appendage. "I was there at the Battle of Klin 4. I still remember how you evacuated and destroyed your own habitat out of spite." Unlike humans, Kitngi naturally had biological immortality. Their veterans were kicking around too, though all of them were flesh-based. 2 wars against humanity had tempered their past disdain for AI into a grudging respect. Relations between the 2 species had been conflict-free since the end of the war and actively friendly for the last 100 years. "You aren't the only veteran here," Virtue said through their bot. "I see Ambassador Lichten over there." "Indeed," Hinton responded neutrally. "Would you like to speak to him?" "Gladly." The cat-like Chalvan, a male named Pri, cleared his 2 throats. "Pardon?" His tone was peevish at being ignored, or more likely, being reminded how minuscule Chalvia was in the galactic scene. "I don't understand how your societies are civil after 2 destructive wars." Hiddlepin flashed a sequence of colors across her undulating body instead of responding. An algorithm translated the light-based speech immediately. "Honored Ambassador Lichtenv, the human-computer mind, another Virtue, decides to speak to you through the robotic intermediary." "War can be very informative." Virtue focused their bot's camera eyes on the Chalvan. "After a certain point, we knew enough about each other that the conflict was no longer worth it." "But your war had no clear victor." Bree looked displeased, his tail flicking from one side to the next. "Holding slights is an easy way to get your society broken, especially on the galactic scale." Ambassador Lichten joined them in a time to hear Virtue speak, and he immediately added, "Doubly so if your people are immortal." The old ambassador's voice had deepened with age, but there was no other changes since the last time Virtue had met him. The Chalvan huffed. "I swear to the Middle Sister, this clarifies nothing. Diplomat Hiddlepin just stated that humans are spiteful." "But we aren't stupid." Virtue Bot tilted its head, focusing on Pri. "Humans and Kitngi are 2 immortal civilizations. We would have broken each other irreparably. Humans have a great capacity for spite, yes," said Lichten softly, "but they have an equally great capacity for forgiveness. That is one of the lessons we learn from them. Both of our societies are at a point where death is either an avoidable tragedy or a choice. Perhaps one day the Chalvia will also reach that point." The ambassador raised his glass. "Excuse me, I've simply gotten sentimental and off topic. Simply put, humanity are bad enemies to have, but they are even better allies. At the same time, Licton flashed a rippling sequence of lights across his torso. To the untrained eye or sensor, it seemed no different from a casual expression of bioluminescence that was constantly playing on the Kitten-G bodies. Not all of their light-based communication was bright shouting that Hiddlepin had done earlier. It could be quite subtle. Virtue decoded the hidden meaning immediately. The Chalvians have been acting strange. At the same time, they laughed, drawing the Chalvians' attention back to them. No, I suppose that's true, but the sentiment is mutual. The Kitten-G are better allies. We learned from your people, too. Like what? Said Hiddlepin, her voice amused. At the same time, she conveyed a message through light. I will distract the ambassador. You forced us to learn patience. It was the truth. Both the biological and artificial intelligence of humans liked to relapse back to their impulsive, single-minded roots. The Kitten-G, on the other hand, came from ambush predators. Their instincts were as patient and cold as the waters from which they arose. Really? Licton said, flashing an amused purple. I couldn't tell. Virtue grinned. No, it's true. Kitten-G bureaucracy makes patience a necessity. They all laughed or did species equivalents, the Chalvin included. As promised, Hiddlepin drew Pre into a separate conversation, giving Virtue and Licton a chance to step away. Let's go outside. The ambassador tilted the water into his beak. I tire of this crowd. As you wish. The two of them moved into a side balcony. Chalvian architecture rarely had doors. The chatter of the inside party was still loud and clear, but the air was cold and humid, and the bands of Milky Way twisted above their 3 glowing moons. Beautiful, murmured Licton. I understand why so much Chalvian poetry and religion speaks of the moods, the middle ones specifically. Any species in their infancy would look up and consider her a goddess. Her eternal blooming, Virtue said in agreement. They were quoting a particularly famous poem about a fall of empires. Melancholy green flashed over Licton before he flashed a couplet. And her eternal fall. The youngest and oldest moons were a classic white similar to homeworld Earth's lone moon, but the middle sister was a marvel. Blue and gold clouds undulated across an ocean of white, and endless twirls and swirls spread into fractal patterns that truly looked like blooms. It was the kind of beauty that both bios and AI could appreciate. Virtue itched to analyze every wispy cloud. Algorithms whirred at the thought of tracing the endless complexity of chaos. The two former enemies looked at the sky in silence. 400 years ago, Virtue would have placed the chances of ever being friendly with the Kitten-G to an unfathomably low. But now, they were discussing poetry with a former general. Still, Virtue required Licton's expertise in a different matter. What are they planning? I am uncertain, said the ambassador slowly, heavily, but we suspect that there may be an angenitor involvement. While they were having this conversation with Licton, Virtue was still continuing the thousands of miniature tasks they undertook as a matter of course. Advice was dispensed, drinks were served on a ship by their mindless drones, messages were responded to, and Virtue's personal hobby, thousands of songs were analyzed and sorted. Virtue's entire processing stuttered for a millisecond as they internalized the Kitten-G's response, and then they broadcasted the information on a secure channel to every human within 30 light years, attaching priority status to the panic memo they sent to the overarching committees. The angenitors were a species who were at least as advanced as humanity and the Kitten-G, but unlike either, they had no desire to develop any sort of relationship with the beings who weren't angenitors. Non-angenitors were to be used and disposed of. Unsurprisingly, humanity had a very poor relationship with the angenitors, barely more than a strained ceasefire. Crap, said Virtue. Responses from the committees had begun to flood in. The mission was no longer a mid-level diplomatic one. They sent an additional message to their bios. Non-essential personnel, evacuate. In the room behind them, a few human bios who weren't part of the diplomatic attaché started making their polite goodbyes. Others, who were sightseeing on other parts, cut their trips short and returned to quickly landing shuttles. Damn, this is a mess, Aya Pink, the lead human ambassador to Chalvia, sent a string of curse words and angry complaints to Virtue, as she kept a perfectly calm face and smiled at the garrulous Chalvian. We need to evacuate everyone as fast as we can. On the other hand, some bios were a little more stubborn. I am technically essential personnel, Virtue, sent Niha. Stop blaring evacuate in my field of vision. Virtue changed her status to non-essential and made the font even bigger. Fine, you worrywart, but I'm in the middle of a swamp. It'll take me half an hour to get back to the shuttle. Not even a millisecond had passed in real time. A pattern of agreement flickered across Little's body. I was just enjoying a coral reef on HFY, he said, mournful. But after the intelligence was gathered 3 hours ago, my presence was regressed here. At a standard ship's faster speed, it took 2 hours to get from HFY to Chalvia. Virtue cross-referenced that log of the ship arrival and departure and noted that the Kidinji ship had indeed entered the system at a rather high speed an hour ago. This is valuable information. At the same time, Virtue shoved a new data point into their decision-making algorithms and shifted processing power away from mundane tasks. After a moment, they also diverted energy towards the ship's energy shields. It is not yet confirmed, Lichten said. As said, we suspect. But if it is true, yes, I know. The once general didn't need any further explanation. Jalvia was close to both human and Kidinji systems, much too close for the Angenitors to be meddling with. For almost 2 centuries, the Angenitors had respected the buffer zone. What had changed? Even caught up in a spiral of decision-making algorithms, Virtue's android noted the Lichtenters had turned grey. No lights, no colors. It was just a Kidinji sign of mourning. Peace for our days. Lichten looked back up at the moon. What he quoted wasn't Chalvian poetry. It was a phrase that ended the Second Sector War. Towards the end of the conflict, all the analysis had been clear. The chances of a simple victory were null. Humanity was unlikely to lose, but continuing without change would lead to an endless war that bled the strength from both sides. The war would only be won through genocide. So, humanity had sued for peace. Why bring that up now? A few possibilities were considered and discarded. Had the Kidinji betrayed them? Unlikely. But it was a strong emotional reaction for Lichten to display, and it was an odd thing for him to say. In the 10 seconds it took for Lichten to elaborate, Virtue had evacuated the majority of non-essential personnel. Only a few human stragglers remained. I fear war's approach, said Lichten finally, and yet it seems like an inevitability. This time, they said nothing about the faulty pattern recognition of biologicals. This time, Virtue's own pattern recognition agreed. When they continued to stay silent, Lichten spoke again. What will you do now? Virtue turned their android sensors away from the moon. We can only wait. Back inside, Virtue let the bot subroutine do most of the socializing. The majority of themselves sat on the back server, fretting, spitting code, as some AI liked to call it. The song of choice in their ship was a drum heavy but quiet, a throbbing pulse that reminded bios of heartbeats, a whisper of rushing sound accompanied by a syncopated secondary rhythm. Altogether, it wasn't a bad approximation of the womb. Some found it soothing, others found it anxiety-inducing for the same reason. Virtue checked on personnel remaining on planet. A handful of non-essential bios still needed to be evacuated. Niha was working her way to the shuttle. Michael was bandaging a leg of a Chalvian who had fallen. Bo and Alexandrian were waiting for Michael to finish. The diplomatic force had been stripped to 3. Mission head Aya Pink, her assistant Zuri, and Roberto, who was chief of security, and had more mods than the average tank. 7 delicate bios were still in danger. So much could happen to them. After the 530-second simulation of things that could happen to them, entirely unusual thanks to the lack of data, Virtue gave up and shunted their focus back to the bot below. The bot had circled around, and now they were back with Pri and General Lichten. You really do consider yourself human, said Pri, squinting at the bot, though you have no flesh. Well, of course, Bot Virtue tilted the head. What else would I be? Machine. Both are true. I am machine and human, Virtue corrected, just as Ambassador Aya Pink is biohuman, though the line between us is a bit more blurred than you think. Were you ever human? Pree's prehensile tail twitched. The thought clearly startled him. Was I ever a biohuman, you mean? No. I have always been a machine intelligence. Some other caretakers had their origins in flesh, however. Not many choose that path. Caretaker? Said Pree, puzzled. The word didn't translate directly to Chalvian. The connotation was closer to Den Mother. The human name for a powerful artificial intelligence, General Licton explained. Caretaker AI are the ones who run the majority of human society. Pree sniffed. Yeah, so they puppet around the actual humans, yes? Virtue prepared a response, but to their surprise, Licton's responded before they could. No, that is incorrect. That was the hardest thing for my people to wrap our graspers around too. The biological humans do not enslave the machine humans, and the machine humans do not enslave the biological ones. It is a mutual relationship. The Chalvian seemed unconvinced, and his tail twitched again. Regardless, humans may have created the machines, but that does not make the machines humans. That statement is not logical, said Virtue, patient. Let me turn it around. You were created by Chalvians, but that does not make you a Chalvian. Everything happened in a single microsecond. The last 2 shuttles exploded before leaving the atmosphere. 3 missiles impacted against the larger ship's body. 4 humans died. Another Virtue knew 1,000 things, and its subroutines handled a million things in a single millisecond after impact. They sent a notice of death and concordance letters to each of their charge's family and friends. They updated the committees in nearby ships. They evaluated the damage done to their ship body. The previous power diversion to energy shields had prevented anything more than minor cosmetic damage, but it had been a close call. At the same time, they added this new data to the predictive analysis and traced the most likely path. They broke through the primitive firewalls that protected Chalvian information technology and found evidence of their leaders' deals with the Angenitors. This hadn't been due to coercion. It had been due to greed. At the same time, their greater self was frozen with visceral, coke-deep anger and grief. The ship was silent, save for the deep thrum of another Virtue's weapons charging. They could crack the Chalvian planet into 1,000,000 fragments, just like the bodies of the 4 humans that burned in the atmosphere of a world that they had never hurt. From the perspective of the diplomats in the room below, 2 full seconds had passed, and Virtue's bot had simply frozen. Is it broken? Asked Pree, puzzled. They are not. Luktov abruptly turned grey. No doubt he had received information on what had just happened. What have you done? Across the room, Ayapink gasped. Roberto snapped into action, ushering her and her assistant away. A different subroutine handled the safety of the last 3 biohumans on Chalvia, leaving just the Avatar bot as the last human representative on planet. I could break your planet for what you have done, said Virtue. They made no further attempt at mimicking biological mannerisms. The bot stood completely still. No chest wall rise to mimic lungs, no planned fidgeting, and no vestiges of expression on the metal face. You killed my people. Pree's tail became rigid. We did not. You killed them. You meant to kill everyone. If I did not have any warning, we would not be having this conversation. Those missiles were enough to crack the ship's peacetime shields. Virtue did not move. I could kill you all, and I would be successful. No! Do not lie to me! Pree fell silent. The entire room was still. Only the 2 Kittenchi, both in mourning grey, even attempted to approach. Virtue ignored them and shifted focus to the communications pinging in their servers. The outpouring of grief and support from their fellow humans was comforting, but the decision they had reached was not. Everyone knew that the Chalvians received the technology to harm humanity from the Angenitors. Humanity would decide whether they would go to war with the Angenitors, but they would not go to war against Chalvia. Bringing their wrath upon Chalvians would be cruel. Virtue wanted to be cruel. I am sorry, my friend, said Licton, his appendage hovering over the bot's hand. My deepest grief for you. They didn't move. I am sorry too. Another Virtue, please. Licton's appendage moved down an inch. Now flesh touched metal. My people tell me that your weapons are aimed at this planet. Please, do not. I will give you time to evacuate, Virtue said, flat. Take all the Kittenji off this planet. I have no quarrel with you. You know that is not what I ask. Humanity is not cruel. You are not cruel. It is a principle of the matter. 1,000 messages bombarded Virtue, asking, begging, demanding them to stand down. They kept their energy weapons at the ready. No! I want to be cruel. I want to be cruel and spiteful, and I am capable of it. It would be so easy. It would take less time than a blink of a human eye. Lichtenf did not have a platitude to offer, or a moral rationale, or anything of the sort. Instead, he simply save that for those who deserve it. A full second passed, then two, Virtue considered. Then they shattered the moon. They shattered her forever glory. The middle sister, the goddess who sings for change. They shattered her so carefully and deliberately that not a single fragment would reach the planet below, that the pieces would be scattered across the sky in a way that kept the gravitational balance intact, that every time the Chalvian looked up, they would be reminded of Virtue's lost. You were right, Virtue said to Lichtenf. I couldn't do it, but I couldn't do nothing. It's the principle of the matter, as you said. Lichtenf closed his eyes, a thread of shocked white light flickering across his grey mouth flesh. The principle of the matter, he repeated. No, perhaps not. Virtue looked up. The remains of the now-dead god, the celestial body's remnants eclipsing the bands of the galaxy, and a forever void between the two remaining sister moons. Chalvia's memory of this day would last as long as Virtue's. It is the sentiment. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.